Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar with Dr. Richard Hogan. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Cliona O'Donoghue and I am Director of Business Development here at Alpha Wealth and also co-owner alongside Nick Charalambous, who also joins us on the call today. We are absolutely delighted to have Richard here as a special guest on this webinar, and unless you've been living underneath a stone, you will have seen Richard feature on TV, on radio, talking about all the stresses that we face in life and how to cope with them, but particularly about adolescence and the struggles that children now face in this modern era of dealing with technology and smartphones. So if you've missed that opening video that we just shared, allow me to introduce Richard. He is originally a Cork man, now living in Dublin, married with 3 daughters. He's a systemically trained psychotherapist, and he runs a very successful business called Therapy Institute, where he is clinical director. He is a prolific writer and features a regular column in the Irish Examiner each week on really, really interesting topics. He is also an author of 2 books, Parenting the Screenager and Home is Where the Start Is. So I would really encourage you, if you haven't read these books, to go out and buy them. There are some really good nuggets of practical advice that everyone can benefit from in these books. So to make this session as interactive as possible, we'd really encourage as many questions from the audience, because we'd love to gain as much insight and expert opinion from Richard here today. So you're very welcome, Richard. We'll dive straight into the first topic, which is one that is actually something very personal to myself, having been through a separation and a divorce. And I know, Richard, you spoke about this very recently in one of your columns. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing in your clinics, and maybe just some practical advice for anybody that's going through this at the moment?
Hi, Cliona. It's great to be here, and hi, Nick. Just want to say I love the work you guys do, so it's great. It's great to be here today, and I am from Cork, so it's a good Cork turnout. Yeah, I suppose, and I lived through this myself, Cliona. My parents separated when I was in my late teens, and so I work with this clinically, and I'm speaking with teenagers and families and blended families, and so I see all the different nuances of separation. And it is a particularly profound life experience. There's no doubt about it. It's probably one of the most challenging life experiences that we go through. But I do believe it can be managed in a way that doesn't damage the children. Of course, children are going to be impacted by it. Of course, there's going to be sadness there. Of course, all of those things need to be validated, but it doesn't have to have a lifelong, sustained damage in a child's life. And it's really about how you manage that period leading up to the divorce and after the immediate impact after the divorce. And that's what I was writing. Go on. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. And I don't mean to interrupt, but
No,
what kind of tips would you have maybe for, children, particularly maybe that are in that situation going between 2 homes?
Yeah, well, and I sit with children who are going through 2 homes, and one home mightn't be that happy, and one might be quite difficult. I suppose the fundamental thing I always say to teenagers going through that is that, this is a short period of your life. It's not going to be the whole of your life, and it can seem like that, and it can be a real weight lifted off their shoulders. When I say to them, I felt the same kind of in my family in some ways, that I thought this was going to go on forever. But actually it doesn't. And you go out there and you find your own agency, you find your own autonomy, you will find your own life, and you will bring incredible bounty and magic into your life. It mightn't feel like it now, right? And that's what's kind of hard particularly when you're that age. You can't see too far ahead because those parts of the brain aren't that developed, and so they don't see, past them maybe like a week or 2 really, and so they always think they're going to be living in this particular uncomfortable experience. But the great thing is that, and I'd often say to them, you've got this incredible thing coming into your life, and maybe they go to college or maybe not, but maybe they might go to college somewhere that gives them a bit of space from, if it's a very negative family experience, to get some space from it. And then for parents, what I'd always say is you don't bring kids into adult themes. you know, and I'd often work with parents who've told the children that the dad, let's say in general, if I'm taking kind of a generalized you know, idea of working in my clinic, that dads had an affair, let's just say, you know, and I'd say, well, what, you know, and there's the mom might say to me, I'm going to tell the kids about this, and I'd say, well, you know, what are you hoping to gain by the children knowing about dad's sexual life? No child wants to think about their parents as sexually, you know, sexual beings and all that. And so I would say just be careful of the adult themes there that you bring your child into, because children, you need to protect that. And it can be hard, of course, it can be very hard because your feelings are really hurt and you know, you've been profoundly, maybe in some ways, let down. Very few marriages end amicably in my experience. There's always you know, a protracted rupture going on there, or there's a massive, you know, revelation of an affair there, or there's something ruptures it, you know, or it was going for a long time and it was difficult. And sometimes children say to me, you know, this was the best thing that happened. You know,
Yeah.
the fighting, we couldn't sustain it. You know, I love my mom and dad, but I just don't think they can love each other. I'd often hear teenagers saying this to me, you know, I love
Which
my
is
mom and dad. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And I just I
a
don't
very
think they can.
brave thing.
Yeah. It's a very mature thing to come to.
And I suppose what I really admire about you, Richard, is the way you speak so frankly and openly and honest about your own childhood experiences. For anybody maybe that hasn't read your books, can you tell them a little bit about your own childhood, your
Yeah.
background? And I know you speak about the very positive influence that your own grandmother had on your life growing up.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks, Kleena. I suppose I was always, you know, I don't like being positioned as an expert. You know, I do lots of research and I've been to different universities. I studied, like, you know, at a high level and all that kind of stuff. But I always thought that experts in my, as I saw it, position themselves as perfect, you know, and they
Mm-hmm.
position themselves as somehow, you know, distant from the rest of us and what's going on in life. And that's, to me, that's complete bullshit, right? I grew up in a particularly family, a loving family, a difficult family. There was alcoholism in the family. We
Mm-hmm.
struggled with alcoholism, you know, and there was all that kind of stuff going on. My grandmother lived with us. My mother did her best in that difficult situation. Money was tight for sure at times. Money shouldn't have been tight. My father had a huge job, but because of addiction and all the rest of it, you know, that it pulled him into it, unfortunately for him. And so we struggled as a family, there's no doubt about it, but the image was fantastic. You know, we looked great. My father was a journalist for the Irish Times. It all looked fantastic. If you saw us on Sunday down the Mass, it all looked great. But the reality was something different. And so I
I,
remember sorry, go on.
I was just going to say that's kind of like an old Irish
It
family,
is,
really, as
well,
such,
it's
because
not that old, to be honest, Kleena.
yeah,
Families are the most secretive things you'll ever get
yeah.
involved in, right? And so everything about the family is designed to keep a secret. And I meet so many people. I'm in my clinic here, and teenagers who sit down and say to me, you know, if I tell you this, am I betraying my dad or am I betraying my mom? You know, and so there's that. We always want to keep the secret of the family, you know.
Which I suppose you kind of delve into in your own past as
Yeah,
well, about the kind of secret initially that you were kind of told to hold back, you know, about your dad's
yeah,
alcoholism
of
and
course.
everything like that. You talk about obviously money being a struggle for
Yeah,
you, kind of, well, sorry, it was a struggle for you growing up, probably because too much money maybe was spent on
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
on
Alcohol. Yeah, yeah. The
alcohol.
pub.
But how do you feel that that has influenced your own kind of behaviors with
Yeah.
money as an adult?
Definitely has, and I'm very aware of it. And my wife is much more sensible than I am. Um, and I was
Well, you
very
know, you kind of
careful.
wonder sometimes how that kind of
Yeah.
like if you've got somebody that's a spender and a saver, and I don't know if that's something you come across in the clinic as
Oh, yeah,
well, where people
absolutely. Yeah, yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
spendthrift and some are
Yeah.
savers, and it can be a difficult dynamic in
It can
relationships.
be, but I often think about Plato and his idea of, like, you know, the whole person is like two you know, different halves coming together to form the whole person. So you bring different things to it. I certainly don't bring any wisdom around money to the family. That's my wife's role, you know. And it's informed by my childhood, because I remember very clearly watching my friends go to McDonald's or whatever, and I wouldn't have had money to do that. And I absolutely felt it. Nobody would have known I felt it, but I definitely felt it. And so with my own children, it's not that I spoil them, but it's that I suppose in some ways it's what Freud would call the compulsion to kind of like repeat things. I like to kind of like go back there and kind of heal that situation for myself, and so I don't really I do like to spend money, and I do like to enjoy money, and I'm not always thinking about saving it for the rainy day. And of course, I probably should have a little bit more of that thinking. But that's my wife; she's more at that, and we'd have conversations around it, and so it's good. She's that half of me that I don't have really.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you say that because Nick, obviously being a financial advisor, I think he kind of struggles with that a little bit of that as well. So, Nick, do you want to give a little bit of your
Yeah, absolutely.
insights there on that?
It's interesting, Richard, because it's really refreshing to hear you speak so frankly, as Cliona said. But I myself went through a difficult childhood. My father was a Greek Cypriot that came to London in 1973 when the Civil War broke out, and it was either England or the US. And he arrived in England, and he did well financially, but it was a tough environment to grow up in. And I have, unfortunately, some of his traits, and some of them are good and some of them are not so good. But like that, I myself find that I overspend, and yet I'm advising clients on a day-to-day basis, and I pride myself on being a good financial advisor.
Healer, heal thyself, they say.
Yeah, absolutely. But interestingly, it's being conscious of that, I think, is for me very important, and I try and impart that on the clients that I talk to. It's living within your means. We do overspend on occasion, but being cognizant. I was interested, I know you mentioned previously around the fact that try not to spoil children and get them to understand the value of money, which I think is a really important thing.
Yeah.
And sometimes I feel bad about my failures. I was referred to as Disney dad at one point, that I take the kids out at the weekend, and I feel really bad about that but I have definitely resonated in some of the things you've said about your behaviors in your past, and I think I'm certainly going through some of that, and it really helped me sort of manage through this, because I find life difficult. I find parenting the most difficult thing, much more so than being a financial planner. And it's good to hear you say that we're not all perfect, and we don't all have to always do the right thing. But obviously, again, I think being conscious mind would be, for me, probably important to recognize that. So yeah, look, it's definitely interesting. Funny enough, I saw a comment by Charlie Munger, who he was basically the the vice chairperson of Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's company, one of the richest men in the world. He died late last year on a fortune of $1.3 billion. And one of these famous comments or quotes that he made was that in the future, the way he feels people will be happier is just to expect less. Just interested in what your thoughts are on.
Yeah, that's a strong statement, and I wouldn't agree with it. And I'd always be wary of these billionaires who tell you to expect less, or billionaires who tell you that money isn't the answer. Money isn't the answer. There's no doubt about it. But I'd rather have more of it than I have less of it, and I think we'd all agree with that one. No, I don't agree with that, because I think if you expect less, and this is what I would see in my clinic a lot, and particularly working with adults, is that this is the seeds of, like, midlife disquiet, as I see it. This is the seeds of, like, midlife. I'm slow to use the word crisis, but I'd say disquiet or unsettling kind of feelings, going where you settle for things in your 20s. You fall into a degree, you fall into a relationship, and you fall into parenting. You're falling, tumbling the whole time. And in your 40s, particularly in your mid 40s, you start to question, well, what the hell am I doing this for anyway? I didn't really want to be an engineer, or whatever it is that you're doing. I never really wanted to do that, and I got into actuary. And when I'm speaking with them, the first question I kind of ask them, well, if you had a choice when you were 20, what was it that you wanted to do? Because they do have a choice, you see. And they'd say, well, I always wanted to be whatever it is. And I'd say, well, what got in the way of you going for that trajectory? They'd say, I never believed I could reach it. And so there's the belief, if you lower your standards, that you'll be happier. I would say, true happiness is found in reaching your future self. True happiness is found in delaying gratification in the present for a sense of who you could be tomorrow. To me, that's really true. When you think about, happiness, it's about real meeting your potential. And we don't know what our potential is. I hear what he's saying, this kind of like in crazy flux desire to be this incredible person. I get that. But if you're saying lower your expectations, I think you'll lower your happiness there. I think working in the interest of your future self, that's where happiness is found. I was a disaster in my 20s. You know what I mean? I knew I had some things in me that I wanted to explore, but I was a disaster because of all the things that I experienced, all the things. I had dyslexia as a kid, and I spoke very badly to myself. And it wasn't really till I went into college And all of a sudden I started to get these really great results and kind of like, scholarships and all that. I was like, hang on a second, maybe I'm not stupid, because I had that paradigm for a long time coming up in my family. Not knowing things in my particular family was seen as being stupid. Now I know it's exciting, not knowing something is really exciting. But when I was 15, I thought, geez, if you don't know something, you're stupid. And then I didn't read as fast as my brothers. I didn't spell like my brothers did. And that made me really develop this idea of myself. And I lived that out for a long time. And, and it really impacted my emotional well-being and my psychological well-being and my relational well-being, all aspects of my life, and with money as well, all of those things. And it wasn't until I started speaking to myself a little bit better, and then started thinking, God, you know what, if I really went after this thing, maybe I could reach something about the potential that I believe I have, because I always believed I had potential. I had something in there. And then when I started moving, Nick, towards it, it's like an astronaut tweaking their, their little instruments there. All of a sudden, I look back, I was like light years from where I started off very quickly. Now I'm moving towards self-actualization. Now that's, to me, happiness. That's thriving. So the idea of like expect less and be happier, I think it's a paradigm that dooms us to actually kind of like real, looking back in your life, I think you think, well, why the hell didn't I have the courage to go for something? Why didn't I go for that promotion? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? I always wanted to do that. And the answer will be fear, Nick, because when we have a fear, we avoid, or we try to overly control. And I would say, avoiding is kind of a little bit of the expect less.
And, you talk about kind of that change that happened maybe when you were in university, and like, how
UCC, Cliona, good old UCC.
two graduates. It's a great place for lots of things. But I suppose, what was it that put you on that path, kind of was it healing yourself, or did you get help, or what was it that maybe helped you kind of, you talk about being in your 20s, and actually something that I find really interesting, and I read in your book, was you mentioned 47.2 as a time when you're at your most unhappiest, which is kind of worrying me, because for me, that's June of next year. And I'm kind of thinking, okay, I need to try and mitigate this.
Yeah, so you do. You absolutely
firstly,
do.
Tell me, like, why is it that 47.2 is kind of your unhappiest year, and what can we do to try and mitigate
Absolutely.
that?
It's such a good question. And I would say, if you're a parent of a child listening to this, 15 is the hardest year. 15 is the most unhappy year for a child, and for adults it's 47.2. And the reason for that is, I mean, it's complicated, but I work with it, and I've written about it so much. I would say for women, particularly women who might have been, daughters who were the eldest daughter in the family, the good daughter, the good mother,
That's
the good
me.
sister. Is that you? Right?
That's
You get positioned in this, in this role of being good. She's very good, and all that's about. It's a bit manipulation to get you to help with the family, and you're so good, you're so responsible, you're so accountable for your behavior. That's brilliant, and so that becomes an unsustainable position to be in. And then you hit your 40s, and maybe you're going through the menopause. There's a lot of biological stuff going on there. Your parents are elderly. Your kids are probably moving towards 15, and so they're in their most unhappy year, 14, 15, with technology going on there. There's huge fights going on. Your parents are elderly. And then your relationship with your partner, it mightn't be what it used to be, and there's a bit of a dip in intimacy. And if you're a man, about 1 to 2% of your testosterone is decreasing after 40 every year. If you're a man, I would say in an Irish context, you're not very good at keeping friends, and all of a sudden you get quite isolated. You look around, you've got no friends to kind of,
why is that, Richard? Like, why?
I just think Irish men are very bad at intentionally holding on to their friends, and I'd see it in Irish boys as well. And I'd say, why don't you ask the lads what they're doing for the weekend? And they'd say, because I thought, geez, I'd seem too needy, or I'd seem vulnerable. That's the stigma around, men kind of talking, texting the lads and saying, where are you going for the weekend? What's up? Might feel a bit needy. And I'd see it in my clinic, a lot of men sitting here crying, because they've no one in their lives. And we get caught with our jobs. We get caught living that promise, that with the Jack of the Land that Steinbeck talks about. We get that promise very early in life. If we work this hard, we will have all this bounty at the end of it. And so we chase it in our 40s. We kind of think, maybe, shit, am I getting a bit older? I need to get that promotion. I need to get where I want to be. And you kind of get single focused, laser focused, and you lose some of the real important stuff, which is the connection with people, because it's all about connection. And so it can be, and I think your intimacy with your partner, you can become quite detached from each other. other. And that's such an important part of your mental health and your well-being, is feeling intimate with someone. And then I think technology is in there too. And pornography, if I'm being honest, working clinically, pornography is in there. And that interrupts intimacy and where you go to satiate, desire and all that kind of stuff, because that's a very isolated, dark place to go. And it moves you away from being intimate and deeply connected to somebody. And when you are intimate with your partner, you'd have to ask yourself, how do I feel after that? You'd say connected, you feel loved, you feel, endorphins are firing, oxytocin is firing. All of these things are really important. And so, yeah, so we can lose all of that in our 40s. And towards the end of our 40s, that can be where it all comes together. And, we ask these questions, big, profound questions at different life stages. And moving towards 50, 52 is middle age now. Moving towards 52, I suppose we ask ourselves, what did I always want to do?
Mm-hmm.
Who did I want to be,
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And like one thing, I suppose, again, and it's coming back to myself, I'm a working mom. 2 years ago, I moved from kind of the corporate world into, joint Alpha Wealth. We're a business owner, and you're trying to juggle all the struggles, I suppose, as a working mom. Children's lives are busy, a blended family, 4 children, all different ages. So it can be hard. So, do you have any tips in that regard, and how to kind of manage your own well-being or my well-being?
Well, you know what? My wife said this to me recently, and it's desperate when my own words come back to get me sometimes, Cliona, because I was speaking publicly about this on RT, and I said, and particularly speaking to women, I have to say, self-care is not selfishness. And my wife was heading off for the weekend, and I was like, well, what the hell? She was like, well, self-care is not selfishness. And I was like, you know what? You're absolutely dead right. And I hate when my own words get used against me. But, we do need to put ourselves in there. We have to think about ourselves, because we can get lost in all of what you described there. That is the busyness. That's the dance of life. That is such a hectic thing. And our 40s are so busy. And I think that's what the research would say. Those in their 50s are much happier, and those in their 60s are ecstatic altogether. Something to look forward for. So, but we mustn't lose ourselves. You know what I mean? You're Cliona. You were a person before you had your children and before you had all this relationship and all that. And I was Richard Hogan, who, a guy who grew up in Grange and Douglas. And we were people before we got into this complicated, dense relationship. But we shouldn't lose that little bit of ourselves too. And that's important. And just for me, going for a run in the evening and all that is to reconnect me with myself and chat to myself and talk. And that's an important space just for me. Then I might go for a walk with my wife. She'll go for a run on her own. And she might meet her friends, and I might go out. And so it's important that you do. I always think a healthy family and a healthy person has that really deep connection with their partner. Of course, it wanes, it goes up and down, but that you're also able to be independent of it as well.
Yeah.
And that you're a separate person, because ultimately your children will leave. That's the good news. But the bad news is that, it won't be till about 25, because adolescence is lasting till about 25 now. And with the housing crisis, they'll probably be with you till they're 40. So, so they're going to be with you a little bit longer, but, they do leave. And then a question I often ask people, when I'm sitting with couples, what will be left? Because they'd say to me, we're so busy, we're concentrating on the kids, we're really concentrating on the kids. Of course you have to concentrate on the kids, but you can't just lose yourself. You can't concentrate on the kids solely, because you can't be happy with yourselves as a couple, and that's going to filter into the children. And so it's really important that you kind of like maintain that. And so that self-care, not selfishness.
So that brings us on to the next kind of, I was going to say, and I'll hand over to you there now, Nick, the next kind of stage in life, which is kind of retirement. So Nick, I'm going to hand over to you kind of, and I mean retirement, it doesn't have to be kind of at an old age, but Nick, I'll hand over to you maybe to talk about retirement.
Sure. We've had a couple of questions in, and please feel free to put some questions in. Cliona's going to pick them up in a moment, but we would encourage you, and thank you so much for the questions we've had. Just, I suppose, Richard, in relation to like what I call retirement, financial independence, I've spoken quite a bit recently helping individuals, and it seems to be a momentum that's really taken grasp, particularly in Ireland. It kind of came across from the US, this whole movement of FIRE, financial independence, retire early, and this whole notion of wanting to be able to not work or certainly not do what we're doing and get the stressful hours reduced or change employment. And I'm 50, and I find at times I feel that way, even though I probably have at least 10 years left of, trying to reach those kind of, I suppose, financial goals that I have. But can I ask you, just my aspect is more on the financial side, but just in terms of the well-being, and it's interesting hearing you say about, this whole reconnection to yourself, and obviously in terms of, your partner. But how are you finding in your clinics, and maybe just on a kind of a day-to-day basis, how people are coping with, I suppose, not working, or getting to that stage? You spoke about that sort of pinpoint focus, because my role is to try and help them achieve that. And you're right, we aim to do the best we can and help people with their finances and reduce the tax they pay and so on. But ultimately, that leaves them in a position that I'm no longer involved with, really, which is, okay, how do you cope? Like, do you fill it in with activities, or what do you do?
It's such a great point and great insight there, Nick, because the brain is just an incredible problem-solving machine. That's what it's designed for, just to solve problems. We're speaking through technology here, the microphone, the bottle of water, the phone that I'm using, the toothpaste I used this morning. Everything is a problem that we've solved, right? And so the brain is designed for that. And it's designed to look for problems, and it's designed, so money is probably the biggest problem that we all think about. It's probably the biggest thing. And I suppose when you get money, that part of the brain just goes, that problem solved, on to the next problem. You know what I mean? You don't kind of go, wow, that's money. All my problems are solved and resolved now. It's not. It's just the brain moves on to the next problem. And I suppose the reason I'm saying that is because what I noticed with retirement particularly, people have it as that, jack of the land. That's the big problem is work, and the amount of work that I'm doing. Of course, people work very complicated and busy lives, and some people have to retire very early if they're lawyers in 52 or what, depending on the firm that they're in, they have to retire early. And what I would say, working, and I do a lot of talks to C-suite and that kind of stuff. I think the fall can be so profound, and that's what I help people with. Some people are solely unsuitable for what retirement is going to bring them, because they've been so active, and they're so busy, and there's so much to offer. And they think the problem, once I retire, all of the stress is gone. And really by 6 months, they're coming to my clinic because they're kind of going, I thought I would feel better. I thought that this would be a better time for me. I thought that I'd be able to, in fact, what they say, I'm missing being important. I'm missing being, valuable. I'm missing, and I'd say, well, that's what we kind of talk about, is how can you be valuable and keep some of your interests going while pulling back and not working at the level that you were working. Because I do think if you don't have anything there, that profound drop can be too much. And I think malaise kind of sets in, that kind of like inert, kind of not knowing what to do with yourself, and thinking at a very, 50, 60 is still a very young age now. You know what I mean? And I'm not just saying that as I get older, but 60 is quite young now. And we can predict that accurately, kind of like late 80s we're going to live to. And so 60, and with all medicine and all that, we can live very active lives up into our 80s, really, And so if you stop at 50, I just think, depending on your personality and what what interests you, I think it's really important to have something there, just because the way the brain is going to shift to another problem, is to have something after. You might take a break for a little bit, but to have some passion, have some interest.
And can I just ask you, Richard, just about stress in general, and not getting too detailed, but I used to think about stress as like, we can all accept, it's like a volcano, we can all accept a certain amount of stress, and then when we get too much, we just kind of explode. And I used to refer it to like, this kind of out of 10, you can cope with 8, but if you go to 9, there's a problem. Is that generally kind of how you see things in terms of stress, just in a high level?
Yeah, well, with stress, some stress is pretty good for us. You know what I mean? It's there to keep us going. It's there to keep us, aware of what's around us. And at times, stress motivates us to do things. I'd imagine Roger Federer is quite stressed going into Wimbledon, and so we're stressed from time to time. And maybe if we're working on a big project, there's stress there, but it also motivates you, and it gets you kind of like focused on things. It's a problem when it's interrupting your sleep. It's a problem when you're ruminating. It's a problem when you're not functioning because of the stress. That's the kind of like the problem when stress kind of takes over. That's what I would say you probably need to think about. What have you taken on that's too much? And for me, it's always sleep. I'm very busy. I work a lot, but I know myself, if I'm stressed, is when I'm thinking about what's ahead that week and how many things I have to do that week. And I'm kind of going, well, you took on too much there. Just get better at saying no at times to things, and then just managing your stress like that. I just know what my stress is, and I just know what are the signs of me being stressed. But I also have pretty good thinking around, like, reacting to a stressed thought, because it's just thoughts. It's just thoughts, you know. And it's like having better reaction to thoughts and not responding to them. We can respond to our thoughts emotionally, or we can just, like, you know, observe them. We're going to go, all right, that was a bit of a stress thought. I just won't take that much into my life because that brings up those stress thoughts. And if I don't want those stress thoughts, I just, you know, don't say yes to too much. But it is, I mean, the stress is, I think we all, like, everybody experiences it. There's just no way around it. And a lot of it keeps us going and keeps us motivated.
It was funny because I think one of your recent articles, going back to the retirement thing, was you said, you know, my retirement is being ruined because I'm expected to mind 7 grandchildren. So
I got massive traction.
I don't think stress ever leaves. We've had a really good question in there. So I'll put this over to you, Richard. It's, with 3 kids, 13, 11 and 9, what tips would the team have to ensure they value money and appreciate what they have and not compare their classmates? And I think this is really, really, and
good.
I see it, you know, even a conversation I had recently with another mum in the school. She had an older boy, and it was around kind of the phones that they were getting for their confirmation, and, you know, what type of phone and the expense of the phone. And, you know, so maybe if you could kind of just maybe.
No, you're dead. Absolutely. It's a great question. And they're very similar ages to my own kids, actually. I'm always trying to instill the values in them around money. I mean, age appropriate, and I don't give them everything, you know what I mean? And I know it's so important for them to hear. And they'll say, why can't I get it? And I'll say, because you got this yesterday and you don't get everything you want. And that's just life. I don't get everything I want either. And so when you get it later on, maybe you'll have, you know, you'll like it more. What you'll see, and I see it a lot, you know, kids getting things in the shop and they want it at the till, they want, you give it to them, and then you see it discarded on the floor an hour later, and you see that it's not really about them. It's not, they didn't want that. They just had a whim to want it. And so there's an expectancy, you know. Patrick Cavan has a great line: through a chink too wide, there comes in no wonder. The too wide is giving children everything. And I always say, the child who expects to get everything enjoys nothing. And I'd always teach my children about comparison being the thief of joy. And it's funny, actually, Cliona, one day there recently enough, we were driving through, I live in Malahide, and as you can imagine, there are pretty big houses and quite affluent estates there. We're driving past a house, and I said in the car, I was just driving along, and my middle daughter's quite precocious, you know, she's always pulling me to task. And I said, Jesus, look at that house, fucking hell, isn't that gorgeous? And I just heard from the daughter behind going, comparison, Dad, is the thief of joy.
Oh, brilliant.
And I was like, well done, you're dead right. I was like, you're dead right. And it's just important to teach them those, you know, and no's are very important. I often think my no's are more important than anything, you know, and it's like, I'm not going to give them this now at this point, and I'm going to teach them a little lesson with this.
What about the meltdown when you, like, sometimes the meltdown when you say that no, and like this is something I suppose around kind of gaming for kids as well, when they're kind of on these gaming, whether it's Fortnite or something like that, and they want to buy these, I can't even remember what they're called.
Skins or whatever.
Skins, that's it. And it's kind of setting in that kind of addiction, really, for kids.
Gaming is addictive. I mean, the World Health Organization has classified it as a new mental health condition. There's no doubt about it.
But how do you know, because sometimes there can be that meltdown when you say no.
Let's just say your child has a meltdown. This is a really important thing. Let's just say at the till or about the skins for the Fortnite. What I'd always say when I'm talking to parents about that is, like, there's 2 separate issues there, right? You always hold your no. You don't give in to the tantrum, because then you give the tantrum currency, and all you're going to see is an escalation of the tantrum to slamming doors, and then it's cursing at you, and it's going to keep going, and then you're going to have an inverted hierarchy when they're older teenagers, and they'll tell you how they want to live in your house, and that's going to be misery for everybody in the family system. And so you don't back down because there's a tantrum. In fact, when I see a tantrum like that, and honestly, I'll be honest, I'm not going to position myself as any perfect father here, but I haven't really had too many tantrums. My eldest daughter, about screen time a little bit. You know, it's unfair. Everybody's on their phones. That's the only thing we would really fight about. But if there is a tantrum, and the youngest daughter maybe a little bit, because she might have had a few tantrums, I'd always discipline the tantrum as well. Not when they're in the tantrum. I'd let the tantrum calm down. When the cognition returns, you know, when it's heated like that and they're emotionally led at such a young age because their brain isn't that well developed, I'd let it calm down. And then I'd say, now, your tantrum, did you get what you wanted because of the tantrum? I'd talk them through it, and they'd say, no. And I'd say, now, you say if they wanted the skins, I was going to give you the skins, let's say maybe on Saturday as a little treat, but now because your tantrum, you're not getting those, and if you have a tantrum again, you won't get it again. And so I'd punish the tantrum. So when they come to hot cognition, they're going to go, oh shit, this doesn't work. You know, so you're always trying to get them to think better when their cognition goes into when it goes hot, you know. And I'd model it for them as well, you know. And I'd show them, I'm under pressure, but this is what you do when you're under pressure. You don't scream and roar, you don't shout and slam the doors, you don't do those things.
And I suppose just in terms of, and there's another actual question which I'll go to first before I ask you the next, but it's a question for Richard. What steps do you use to talk better to yourself? Journaling, reflection, meditation, just some tips, please.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. So like, neurons that fire together, wire together, neuroscience tells us, right? So we can change your thinking. Thoughts are just habits, and we generally develop them when we're about 6 or 7 or 8 years of age. That's when most of our stories, the narrative that gets written about who you are and what you're about, gets written at that young age. And so we have about 60 to 70,000 thoughts a day, and 90% of those are what we thought yesterday. So we're just thinking in loops. We're just thinking in circular loops there, right? And the reason we go around in loops is because we haven't died yet, and our brain thinks, well, the way you think is keeping you alive, so keep going with the way you're thinking there. And generally, it can be quite painful to live in your head, right? And so what I do is actually, and I do this with a lot with clients, I kind of think of things that I want to say that day about myself. And I always kind of say, clean, if I'm being honest, something good's going to happen today. I've been saying that to myself for a long time. And so I orient my brain towards, and then when something nice happens, I think, that was the good thing I thought might happen. It might be, it might be a small
So
thing.
just positivity, breathe positivity.
It absolutely does, and it's intentional first. If you're quite negative in your thinking, which would be normal for your brain because it's a problem solver, it's looking for problems. You can orient it towards more positive thinking by saying something like, let's just say I am enough. I'm worthy. I'm good enough. I'm not a charlatan here. I'm not going to get found out. I believe my talent. And I would say maybe something like one thing like I am enough. I'd look for 3 examples of that during the day of me being enough or people valuing me. I'd say there it was, there it is, then that was that. And so what you're doing then is just reorienting your mind towards more positive thinking. Because what I'd meet in my clinic a lot is people sit down and say, nothing ever good happens in my life. And of course, if I'm waking up and thinking nothing good's going to happen today, you know what I mean? I'm not going to be open to seeing it. And so just by having a little more intentional at the start, a little bit more intentional, positive orientation towards my thoughts, I kind of do it now without actually being intentional about it. It's just kind of, I've changed my little thinking there.
And it's kind of even when you wake up in the morning, I think sometimes you can kind of maybe get into a bit of a negative spin. You have to pull yourself out of it and kind of pull yourself back and say, do you know what, I'm going to start today on a positive.
Absolutely. And you know what I wouldn't do first thing in the morning is check my phone. I love my commute. I love watching I love kinesthetic imagery moving around, going through the countryside there. I never, like very rarely will I go on my phone. And if I do, I catch myself and I'm going, you don't want to be doing this. And I put it in my pocket again because I love that moment of traveling and just the emotion of it. And just like, it's meditation to me, looking out and thinking about the day and thinking about what's in my life and thinking about the bounty
present.
and thinking about the bounty of my life, because we can all think of the negatives. We can all think of the deficits. You know what I mean? We can all look at someone else and say, I don't have that car, I don't have that house, I don't have that I can't, that. And you can, really always go for the negative. But if you start to actually your day off like that, thinking about the bounty, because the chances of you being alive is 400 quadrillion to the power of 150,000. I mean, the chances of you being alive is almost zero. This is the great miracle. This is the great magic. And so if you're going to let it be tainted by what you perceive other people want of you, or perceived expectations of other people, it's a real tainting of your gift. It's a real tainting of the magic that's your life. And so by being a little bit more intentional, as I did myself, I think your thinking becomes much more positive and you start to enjoy things.
You touched on being, I suppose, diagnosed with dyslexia as a child, and a question has come in. Can you give any tips to me as a parent of a child with dyslexia and how to support?
Definitely. No, I'm an ambassador for Dyslexia Ireland, and I work a lot with dyslexic children and all that. And I suppose the first thing is change your thinking around dyslexia. It doesn't mean your child is, has a learning difficulty, or that there's a disability there, or that they're stupid. Because I'd often meet parents kind of with that kind of idea. They'd say to me, Cliona's very bright, but Jane isn't. Jane's dyslexic. Kind of like that, it's like, well, it's going to be difficult for Jane if that's your ideas around it. So just watch your ideas around dyslexia, because, Einstein was dyslexic, and John Lennon was dyslexic, and W.B. Yeats, our great national poet, was dyslexic. So we don't really know what it is, but it certainly can disrupt reading and spelling and all of that. But there's a lot of creativity to it too. And so, like, I've written 2 books, you know what I mean? And the laptop is a fantastic thing. If I had a pen, I'd never be able to write anything, but with my laptop, I could sing. With the pen, I was muted. So for a parent, I would say, watch your talk. Your child will have very negative self-talk because of dyslexia. And I'd often think of it like anorexia. It's like a dyslexic voice. It speaks things to you. And like, I'll give you an example. When I was in college, in first year, I was studying English and psychology, and I came in the top, whatever the class, and the English department wrote to me saying, offering me this scholarship, and that would I keep on English because I came in the top, whatever it was, percentage of the class. And I remember thinking, God, they must be hard up. That was my first thought. I wasn't thinking, God, wasn't that amazing that I came in the top percentile? Wasn't that amazing that they're offering me a scholarship? Jesus, that's amazing.
Which is amazing. Which
Is
is
amazing. I can
Yeah.
see that now. But when I was 20, I was thinking, Jesus, they must be hard up, because that's how I viewed myself, right?
I know.
You know what I mean? And say they must be, Jesus, they must need the numbers, right? There was like hundreds of people in the theater, but I was thinking, Christ, they must be hard up. And that's the way a dyslexic child can think. They can have very negative self-talk, and they can have a very, they're primed to look out for how you think about them, how you talk about them. So again, another tip: watch how you speak about your child, and when they're not listening, when you think they're not listening, because they're always listening. And when you're talking to your family members about whatever child has dyslexia, just watch how you change it, how you speak about it, reframe it. And if we want our children to change how they think about themselves, we need to change how we talk about them. And I would, and I'd get them into maybe a group, and get them into the loads of dyslexic groups and all that kind of stuff, where you meet like-minded people. And I'd show him, about the genius of dyslexia too, and the talent around it, and all the people that have had it. And most CEOs I work with are all dyslexic. It's funny because they all come up to me afterwards and say, like, thanks for speaking about it, because I'm dyslexic too. Honestly, the vast majority of CEOs that I work with have dyslexia. There's, the famous is Richard Branson, they're all,
It comes
funny.
back to being open again, doesn't
It's
it?
open,
Because
it's
sometimes, what do
creative.
they say? A problem shared is a problem halved.
Yeah, well, it's that creative thinking.
Yeah. There was one thing actually, I suppose, that I heard last week you mentioned on another podcast, and it said it was money will follow if you follow your interests.
Yes, I fundamentally believe that.
I think for, a lot of parents, particularly at this time of the year, maybe when they're guiding children through school, exam years, everything like that, for any kids maybe sitting, like leaving cert exams and everything like that, and as a parent, you're trying to guide them in a certain direction, like what's the best advice to give to a child, a parent in that situation? It's hard at 17, 18, trying to make those big life decisions.
Yeah. Again, that's what I say to them. Life doesn't go like this, Life doesn't go in a straight line. It's what Carl Jung would call the circumambulation of the self. It goes around. It is moving, but it's going around. You go up, you down, you go down, you have a good time, you have a bad time. And that's kind of life. And, I think we're very risk averse in our thinking, and we have to let children fail. I reframe failing always as like, learning moments. We have to have those learning moments. When do you learn? You learn from the moments where you didn't reach at something, where you didn't succeed. As Bill Gates says, success is a very poor educator. They're the moments that you really learn, that you really recalibrate, and you go again. If you got good thinking, you go again. If you got kind of fear, you lower your bar and you don't go again, and then you live your whole life with this fearful kind of position. I would say we need our kids to be bold, and we need them to be resolute, and to be strong, and have teeth, and to go for things, and not to expect to get everything. And when you don't get it, okay, good, recalibrate, go again. And that's what we need to teach your kids. And don't go into something because you believe that's what someone expects of you or wants you to do. Think about what you want yourself and what you want to bring into your life, and go after it. And sometimes it mightn't be exactly what you want. Move again and change again. It's never, it's what George Eliot said, it's never too late.
Fail. It's okay to fail.
Well, no, it's not even okay to fail. You have to fail at things. No, you're not going to go through life without having setbacks. You have to have those things in your life. That's when you look back in your life, that's the richness of life. All the bounty that came into my life was when I didn't get something, I went a different avenue. I think particularly adolescents, and I think parents can give their kids this idea of the straight road ahead. And it's just like, it kind of is the antithesis of how life is. And there's all this winding road that is the richness and the bounty of kind of like being a human being, and not to expect it to go exactly the way you want it to go, because if you're that much in desire of control, it will cause all sorts of problems, because it's never going to go the way you want it to go.
Absolutely. And that's life.
That's
unfortunately.
life. Yeah, you're riding high in April and you're shot down in May.
I know, the roles of life. Yeah. I'm going to ask one final question, and I'd encourage, if there are any other questions from the audience, maybe to pop them into the Q&A now. But Nick wrote an article last week on the 5 tips that he would teach his younger self, kind of from a financial advisor perspective, and we can share them with anybody that's interested in seeing them. I suppose from your perspective as a psychotherapist, and I'm not asking you for 5, but maybe what are some tips maybe that you could share with the audience here today, if you knew, as you're
As if I knew now what I knew then, or if I knew then what I know now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think to be brave is a really important thing. Dare disturb your universe, you know, don't be comfortable in things. I think that's a line from T.S. Eliot, you know, dare disturb your universe, have the courage to go for things and to see when you don't land on something, not as an internal attribution of how bad you are, but actually to see it as a learning moment about how you go again and how you get better at something. And I'd always say to people, you know, don't chase money. You know, that's not generally the way to go. Chase being good at something and developing a passion. Money then will come in a much more healthier way and a more sustaining way. If you're chasing money and you're doing a job that you don't really like, that's where I'll meet you down the line. You know, and when you realize ultimately you follow, because we get this idea that if you follow ABC, D is going to be bountiful, and that's go to college, get married, have kids, do the job, and sometimes it's really D is a profound letdown because you're doing a job you don't like. And I would say don't do that, because that's later on disquiet and unhappiness. Follow your passion and go after that. And it's never too late, no matter what age you are, to actualize something that you've always wanted to do. And I would say develop, again, if we're talking about retirement with Nick, develop parts of your personality that you've always been interested in, whether that's writing a book or learning the guitar or learning a language. You know, just always be kind of, I think, working towards bringing something more into your life, because ultimately your life and work ends.
Yes.
And if you know, that's ultimately
for me, it's painting, but I just can't find the time. I can't find the time for it anymore.
You can always find the time. If some of the CEOs I work with can find the time, you know, you can find the time.
But it's engaging the other side of your brain.
I know it is, absolutely.
Creative side.
I love writing, and you know, I'm working on a novel at the moment, and I have to eke out little moments of, like, on a Sunday to do it. But there's always time if you do it. If you manage it properly, there's always moments where you can do it. And it's just so important that you develop those things in yourself, because our working life comes to a conclusion. And if the only thing about us is that we valued ourselves in our job, that would be a profound letdown. You know, do you know what I mean? If beauty is the only thing if beauty is the only thing that I value as in my 20s, when I hit my mid 30s and things start to, as you know, Yeats said, fall apart, as things start to fall. I mean, you're going to have a profound letdown, because you're chasing something of beauty and all that. So you have to have more aspects to your personality, because working life will come to an end, and then you want to move into this next phase of bounty, which is a great phase.
Well, thank you so much for your
thanks a million, guys.
Incredible insights today. To everybody that's on the call, we are giving away 4 copies of Richard's book, Home is Where the Start Is. It's an excellent book. I know you talk a lot about the genogram. I've yet to kind of do it. But you know,
that book was shortlisted for an Irish Book Award. I didn't win it. I have to go again.
That's okay.
I have to go again. Exactly.
But thank you so much. So what we would ask people to do to be in with a chance of winning one of 4 copies for Richard's book is just sign up for our newsletter. Ruth is in the background there, and she's going to share the link to that. We've also shared links to Richard's Instagram page, to our own Instagram page. So obviously follow Richard for the psychotherapy kind of advice, and follow us for the more financial advice. We're doing lots of webinars on lots of different topics. But genuinely, thank you so much for your time today. I know you're a really busy man, and we really appreciate you coming on today to share those insights with us. Also, thank you to everybody for taking time out of your day to join the webinar today, and have a super weekend.
Thanks a million, Cliona. Thanks, Nick. You're doing great work down there. Thanks, guys.
So much.
Thanks, pleasure.
See
Thank
ya.
you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.